All right. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to the April installment of the Sustainable Forest Education Cooperative 2026 webinar series. My name is Peter Deezer. I'm the University of Minnesota Extension Educator for Forest Dependent Wildlife, sitting in today for Lane Mosier. I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Michael Demchik, Professor of Forestry at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. Today, Mike will discuss northern hardwood management with focus on implications for use in uneven age management and irregular shelterwood systems. Just a couple of quick things to share with you that I'll post into the chat once we get started here. If you'd like continuing education credits, you can click on the link I'll provide to submit a request. Also, I'll share links to the SFEC webinar series calendar and upcoming events page. We'd love to have you join us for future webinars and events that we have planned for 2026. And stewardship plan writers, please include your plan writer ID in your submission. And if you can't remember it, email sfec@umn.edu. And I'll post these again at the end. So folks that are just coming in now will have another opportunity, or those that come in after I post them will have another opportunity to see them. Also, look for SFEC's April event update in your inbox this week. We have several upcoming events that we're really excited about. And we're jumping back into the woods here now that we've fully reached the spring. Please note that the May 27th site assessment and prescribed fire design workshop is for the ecological silviculture course only, but the following day we have a fire dependent forest ecosystem field day that's open to everyone. And on June 2nd, we have, with Aiken County, we'll build off of Mike's presentation and take a look at uneven aged hardwood silviculture and the timing between treatments. So feel free to use the chat to interact, but please post your questions in the Q&A tab and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of Mike's presentation. And with that, I want to welcome Mike Demchik. Mike, thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
I'll share my screen here.
That looks good.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about essentially northern hardwood management, and it's going to be a composite of a number of projects that I've done over the years. I'm going to start this at my interview. So I interviewed here at Stevens Point in 2004, and my topic they asked me to present on was alternate approaches, management of sugar maple dominated forests. And I got pretty excited about that because if I look at the two main species groups for tree species that I work with, northern hardwoods and then oaks are the two that I'm most comfortable with. And I talked about a range of silviculture at that presentation, and one thing I could tell pretty immediately is that in Wisconsin at that time, anything other than single tree selection where you were marking from below was kind of considered sacrilege by some people. And this creates a bit of a challenge because when you look at the history of hardwoods in Wisconsin, many of them originated from the cutover. And so we had the big cutover. And then once the timber started getting big enough that it could be harvested, you had somewhere from 35 to 50 years ago where they were doing stump cuts. And stump cuts, they actually gave people, a chain that actually would go around the tree. And if the tree was bigger than that chain, that tree got cut. It's kind of a diameter limit harvest. And after that, we started getting a hardwood pulp market that developed pretty solidly. And with the development of that hardwood pulp market, as well as bulk markets, there was a period of what I'd call paint the junk. That was the main training for the foresters. And when you take early career people, and a lot of the timber was marked by interns or early career foresters, they started marking what was a lot of the low quality stems, and in some cases also some of the younger stems because of lack of knowledge on their part. And through time, what that translated to is some of these stands have been entered anywhere from 2 to 5 times. And they are frequently still the single cohort that they originated with, or in some cases, if there was a fairly hard selection harvest and light got to the ground, they're two cohort stands. It's relatively uncommon to see more than two cohort stands here, and many of them are literally a single cohort with out much regeneration. So, translation of this for general issues, most of our northern hardwood stands have had at least one hard selection harvest, and some of them high graded in the past. Most of them have aged in place for a really long time without a second cohort coming in. So the timber that is there is kind of on the old side and is mature. Most of them are one to two cohorts, and in the stands with two cohorts, you have a lot more opportunities than the ones with one cohort. We are still applying attempts at single tree selection on many of these sites with the understanding that we are not really doing single tree selection. What we are doing, and I'm quoting one of our silviculturists over here, we are trying to set the conditions that in the future we can actually do single tree selection. So we're really doing some form of uneven age conversion. We're taking an even age overstory and trying to create the age class diversity that will make it so that at some point in the future we can do single tree selection. And in a lot of cases, regeneration is failing. Depending on where you're in the state, we had a really exceptional 2012 seed crop. And I remember doing some counts on those when they first came up, and you're looking at like 1.2 million seedlings per acre, incredible seedling numbers. Many of those in these fully stocked stands are still the same ankle height. They're, from 2012 seed crop, they have been growing now for 12 years, and they haven't really gotten any taller than your ankles in many cases. The other component that unfortunately drives this is hard maple, particularly, is a white wood. And so the higher value is for wood that is without the false heart. And so the defects are on the inside of the tree, but as a forester, you're looking at the trees from the outside of the trees, trying to predict what's going on the inside. And as these trees age, they start to accumulate injuries and wounding, and they accumulate, a whole lifetime of issues that eventually, end up causing some pretty severe problems. And with hard maple, we get dark heart. So that dark heart comes with a lower value for the wood when it's sawn from it. And it comes in a lot of different flavors. So if I look on these, the one in the upper right is actually one of the nicer ones. It's got a relatively small, fairly centered heart. That's a pretty nice log. If I look at the one in the upper left, you can see a history of seams causing significant problems. And through time, if it gets advanced enough, the two bottom ones have a significant size included decomposition pockets. So, I mean, that's kind of what you're looking at with this. So I'm going to take from that setting multiple projects. We did a dark heart project. We did an internal rate of return project. We did a marking project. And then what we are doing with a maple defect project. And I'm going to roll it all together into kind of a package. And I'll go project by project and then what I think are the deliverables. So I'll start with my dark heart project. So I did this work with my graduate student at the time, Joel Kaminsky, and Nilesh Timelsina, who's another professor here, well, was another professor here. And we worked within three geological formations. The first one's the Copper Falls Formation, which is mostly sand and silt with a little bit of clay, tends to be kind of calcareous in some areas. Then we have our Marathon Formation. That is also mostly sand and silt, still relatively little clay, but it tends to be a bit finer textured than the Copper Falls Formation. And then we've got this one, the Holy Hills Formation. It generally tends to be finer grained than either the Marathon or the Copper Falls. So those are the three that we were working. And for that project, we were looking at trees that were standing. We were measuring stuff as was standing, and then they were felled and merchandised. And in an ideal world, we measured them immediately prior to felling, and then we were measuring the trees after they were felled the same day. Now, sometimes that didn't work that way, but many times we had to turn around to where we were actually measuring the felled trees shortly after we finished measuring the standing ones. For the restrictions, there had to be at least 20 hard maple trees on the site. Each of the trees to be considered had to be at least 12 inches in diameter. It had to be on active logging sites because these trees were going to be felled with landowner and logger permission to work on it. And we went through and we collected all of the stuff that you would normally think we would collect for site data. We had soil samples, we had geological formation it was in, habitat type. We did quite a bit of information for standing trees. Well, things like diameter, height to crown, grade of the base of the tree. And then after the trees were cut, we gathered data on the merchandise logs. We measured false heart within the trees, and false heart is generally a linear measure, so it's not an area measure, but a linear measure. So it is a proportion of the diameter of the tree linearly, or diameter of the log, I should say, linearly. That is in false heart. So we graded the tree, and as we graded it, we used the best 12 of the lower 16 feet. We followed generally Forest Service grading criteria with the qualifier that we tweaked the grading criteria to match with GLTPA, Great Lake Timber Professionals Association guidelines. And the reason we did that is because we also graded the merchandise logs into the pieces as they were merchandised. And in order to make the tree grade match log grade, and these are being sold through some variation of GLTPA grading at the mills, we wanted these logs to match the grading criteria that we use for the stems. These were cut as the logger chose to cut them. That was their instructions. We did not want them burying their merchandising based on us. So in cases like this stem, where the logger thought that they could actually butt off the individual pieces to get to a veneer log, you can see there's some internal degradation in there, and they made a bet. They made a bet that the first piece would make it better. It didn't work. They made a bet that the second piece would make it better. It didn't work. Made a bet that the third piece would make it better. And by the time they took the third piece off, they actually had made the log into a veneer log. So, some of these did change grade when they were cut based on the merchandising of the logger. So overall results on this. This is the kind of chart you're never supposed to show in a presentation, but I kind of want you to follow through with this. Grade 1, 2, and 3 at the top are classic grade, the classic log grade. Grade 4 should be considered below grade. So we did a grade 4 that included everything that did not meet the grading criteria for grade 1, 2, and 3 logs. And then our diameters. These are dBH on the tree. And as you go down, as the log diameter gets bigger, as you go down the chart, the percentage of the proportion of false heart increases. As the log grade decreases going right, the proportion of false heart increases. So lower quality logs have more false heart. Larger diameter logs have more false heart. Really large diameter, poor quality logs have an enormous amount of false heart. So the way to look at this is as trees age, they accumulate a lot of injuries and wounding. That accumulation of wounding tends to increase the percentage of false heart. So younger, more vigorous trees generally are higher quality trees. That's project 1. Project 2 is looking at these maples for internal rate of return. And once again, this is with my grad student, Joe Kaminsky and Nilesh Timsina. And we took the Timber Mark North price reports from 2012, which was the last year they did delivered price on log by grade. We corrected them to 2018 prices because that's when we did the work on these sites. And then we did deductions for harvest and freighting costs. And that's how we did our pricing. And we came up with a pricing chart by prime veneer, F1, F2, F3, bolt, and pulp. So that's how we came up with our kind of pricing conditions for this. And I'm not going to obsess on that for this portion of it. When you look at trees, and these are dBH at time of cutting, these are the internal rate of return experienced by those trees in the last 10 years prior to them being cuttings. So up to being cut, what was their internal rate of return for the last 10 years? The thing you'll notice for a tree that's a grade one, if it's in the 13 or 15-inch diameter class, it has some pretty nice economic return. You're looking at 14.6% internal rate of return or 7.8%. Once that tree is in the 19-inch diameter or bigger, your internal rate of return goes way down. And the way to think of this is you are holding volume in that stem that is high value volume and that is now not increasing in product class. When it is 13 and 15 inches, it is actually changing product class from bolts to saw logs or from pulp to saw logs. And when it's doing that, it's significantly increasing in value. But as soon as it's actually got to what product class it'll be, if the first piece is going to be a veneer log, the second piece will be a saw log, and then it'll be bolts and pulp above that. For that tree, once it's done that, it is now only on growth. So you're not changing value by changing product class, you're changing value by growth. And we are in the frozen north. We don't have a very long growing season. More than half the year, there are no leaves on those trees. And the impact of that is once you drop down to growth, your internal rate of return is going to be 2%, 3%, and that's not hurdle rate that works for investment generally. If I look at this presented in a figure, this is kind of a pretty obvious thing. These grade one trees are the ones that allow investment forestry to actually work in the lake states. These ones that are grade two, three, or below grade, the impact of timing on harvest of them is relatively low consequence. The impact on internal rate of return through time is relatively low. It's really those high value trees where there are some big differences. And so the way to look at this is if you want to maximize internal rate of return, it's determined by the ability of that tree to jump grade or product class, for it to go from a grade three to a grade two, or for it to go from a pulp to a bolt or bolt to saw log. Once that tree gets to whatever product class it's going to be, its internal rate of return is only going to decrease, and it usually decreases to just straight up growth, which is slow. So that's project two. Project three was done with myself, Dan Myers, and I set the project up originally with Dr. Suvagatam, and then he changed jobs. And so I still want to give him special thanks, but majority of the project was carried out with Dan and myself. And what we did with this is WISFRS is the Wisconsin Forest Inventory and Reporting System. And so all state and county land sales are in there. And if it is in managed forest law, those are also there. First of all, we selected stands that were labeled northern hardwood who had been marked by either single tree selection or uneven age management and had not yet been cut. The county land and state land, we randomly drew 11 county land sales and 7 state land sales. And then we did industrial and private parcels, which were 8 sales. We went out and we measured everything you would normally think we would: species, DBH, total height, height to crown position, tree health, blah, blah, blah. And then we also looked at current tree grade and potential future grade. The idea of potential future grade is if right now it is a bolt-sized tree, but that tree has the potential to be, veneer in the future, or even, prime veneer, that is actually recorded as potential future tree grade. And this is the kind of figure you're not supposed to put within a slideshow, but it has so much information, I'm going to slowly dissect it for you. So dissection number one. If I look at the pre-marking basal area, that averaged across the site at 105.5 square feet of basal area. After marking, it was marked to 71.8. What that works out to is 32% of the trees were marked. If I give a target for someone and it's a basal area target, so if I look at marking, one of the big things that's frequently used is a basal area target. Well, I generally tell people if you don't want to worry about the stand health or storm resilience in it, you can frequently remove about a third of the basal area without having storm resilience issues within the stand. So this was almost perfectly 1/3 removal, like exactly what I would recommend. And it had a basal area of roughly 72 square feet, which is a really fine target. So step one, these generally hit pretty solid targets for basal area removal. So very good that way. Step two, tree selection. So frequently in Wisconsin, we have what's called an order of removal. An order of removal is generally how you decide which trees to remove. And first is high risk trees. Second is releasing crop trees, so cutting neighbors to give crop trees an opportunity. And I have what I'm going to call other stuff because, frankly, I think that if you do the first two well, all of the other things below it never actually matter. So we'll start with high risk. So if I look at this, but in the lower portion of this, marked for removal, 9.1 square feet of basal area on average was marked that was high risk trees, and 2.1 that were high risk trees were left. So generally 81% of the high risk trees were marked. Now, the way to look at this, some of those high risk trees are actually intentionally maintained wildlife trees. So just because they kept them, they're potentially being kept with other goals for the site. They could be high risk at the high quality wildlife trees. The injury also could have happened after the time of marking. But generally, the foresters did a really good job of finding and marking the trees that were high risk. So the next we're going to look at is releasing crop trees. I use the word crop tree really specifically. I use it as trees which have the potential to increase in product class or grade. It is used a little more broadly by others, so I'm going to split this by my definition and then the broader definition. My definition, tree that has the potential to upgrade. So if I look at the bottom, those are trees removed from marking, removed with, marked for removal. So 8.3 square feet of basal area had the potential to increase and upgrade. However, of the trees that had the potential to upgrade to go from bolt to pole or to saw log or to go from grade two to grade one, 30 square feet, 30.5 square feet of them were actually maintained on the sites. So in general, foresters did a really good job of identifying trees that had the potential to upgrade and keeping them. That 8.3 that is being removed may well be trees that are being removed to release other crop trees. So just because you have 21% being removed that could upgrade doesn't mean that in that stands case it is sensible to keep them. In general, 79% of the basal area that can upgrade was kept. Now, pushing to a little bit broader level of what crop tree is, these are what I call retaining trees or maintaining trees. These are trees that are being maintained or retained on the site, but they are actually ones who are not going to change in grade. They've already made it to the grade and product class they're going to be at. So 15.6 per square feet were marked and 35 square feet was left. What this means is 35 square feet of basal area on that site, which is not quite half of what's left, is actually trees that are only on growth now. They are not changing product class. So overall, about a third of those trees got marked. So if I look at this overall marking for single tree selection on even age conversion, what I'm going to say is in general, the foresters did a really good job. They marked about a third of the basal area. They had a 72 square foot basal area residual when they were done. They did a really good job of recognizing and retaining upgrading volume. They did a really good job of looking at high risk volume and getting it off the site. So if I was looking at this from single tree selection, they did an exceptional job. And this is across all ownerships, county, state, and both industrial, private, non-industrial, and private industrial. Bigger question I would have though is are these stands actually capable of single tree selection? So just because the foresters did a good job of marking the sites doesn't actually mean that the prescription of single tree selection necessarily was the best prescription. This is what these look like. The gray bar is the total, and you generally have fewer big trees and more small trees. But what you're going to notice is that there's not a, well, we'll get to that. And if you look at what is reserved, generally, they reserved good quality. They reserved, some of the bigger trees, some of the smaller trees, and a lot of what was marked represented a broad range of sizes. If I set this to what's called a Q ratio, so a Q ratio is the number of trees in the next lower diameter class divided by the number in the next higher. So the number of 8-inch trees divided by the number of 10-inch trees. So a Q ratio of 1.7 says there are 1.7 times as many 8-inch trees as there are 10-inch trees. So I have this idealized curve right here. And the thing you're going to notice about this idealized curve is we are short on the pulp and bolt size trees. And that is problematic because if you remember my statement earlier, the only ones actually having good internal rate of return are my pulp and bolt size trees becoming pulp becoming good bolts becoming saw logs. Once I get into this category of 12 plus inches, which is where I see the inflection point, these trees are mostly on growth at this point. So if I look at this by upgrading trees, these are the ones that are changing product class. I have 30 square feet kept. And if I look through this, the part under this category, these are the ones with the highest internal rate of return. That's where we're short. We are very short on the smaller, high quality stems. We have trees within this category, which are the sawlog size category. In many cases, they are already where they're going to be. And these big ones are almost guaranteed where they're going to be. Every tree we've kept past 18 inches is guaranteed mature economically. And what that means is we are overrepresented in trees that are not going to change product class. And this is across all of these ownerships. So if I'm going to summarize all this, it goes like this. Once a tree hits product class, everything that can happen to that tree is bad. As soon as it is veneer, holding that tree till the next stand entry subjects it to everything that could possibly happen. Injuries, mid-stem tear-outs, ice storms. We just had a massive ice storm over here, which played havoc with an awful lot of stuff that I've been managing. As soon as the tree's at product class, all possible risks that can happen to it are going to do nothing but make it worse. We generally are managing our hard maple stands to try to make the best product grade 1 or better. When I start looking at these logs, grade 1 logs or veneer logs, if I have a hard maple and the first piece is capable of being a grade 1 or veneer, it will have hit that size, the first piece, so the first 8, 10, or 12. We merchandise in this region variable length, usually 8, 10s, or 12s for hardwood, with exceptions for certain specialty markets like mats. And so that tree will hit that at 16 to 17 inches DBH. If the second piece in that tree is actually capable of being prime veneer, so highest end veneer, it's still going to hit that size at 18 inches. So by 18 inches DBH, I will have two pieces, if they're capable of it, that will be at prime veneer sizes. Most of my hard maples only have one good piece in them, if they have a good piece at all. Most of those trees. Now, there's some exceptional trees. I don't want to say some sites have amazing stuff, but for the most part, most of our hard maples have a single, very high quality piece, and most of the rest of the pieces are lower quality. But look at that tree on the left. That is an amazing tree. So that thing is smooth bark, very rapid growth rate. Right now, that tree is probably putting on 13 or more percent internal rate of return. So it's a tree that has a lot of potential to increase in product value. That tree on the right has a collection of internal defects in it, and it is degrading at this point. So that leads me to, how can foresters determine what's going on inside a tree? And so once we had done these other projects, we put together a set of publications, and the first one is on hard maple, and the second one is mostly developed at this point is on oak. And I want to thank the Wisconsin Forestry Center, Taggart Lumber, Les Warner, Joe Kaminsky, and a whole bunch of hand cutters for helping make this happen. We have a hardwood defect, set of hardwood defect guides. We have the hard maple one currently available through the Wisconsin Forestry Center. So if you look at Wisconsin Forestry Center hardwood defect guide, you'll be able to find it. We have a hard maple guide, and with the next few weeks to a month, we will actually have our oak guide available as well. This actually looks through individual defects and then we meld across the defects so a forester can look and see what the internal impacts of an external defect are in a tree. It'll assist them in making marking decisions. So if I look at this tree, that has incredibly smooth bark, really high vigor tree, fast growing bark, super clear log, not gigantic. Got that tree, and it's got a pencil-sized heart inside it. It is just amazing whitewood. That is an amazing rotary veneer log. Incredible internal condition, $3 a board foot at the time delivered price. It's going to be less now, but at the time it was $3 a board foot delivered. Extremely high value log. Now this is a significantly bigger tree. It's still got fairly vigorous bark, but the bark is lower vigor than the previous one. It's still really clear. Let's drop that tree. So we cut it, and what you're going to notice is there's an accumulation of defects. It's got a false heart from history of injuries. It has included bark. It has fluting. There's essentially no way to take this stem and trim it in order to turn it into a veneer log. So this is going to become a saw log. Now it's still a nice saw log, but this is mature and degrading in quality at this point. So the awareness of these external cues. So growth rate is related to bark. If I look at these trees, those barks on those trees indicate that those trees are growing rapidly. That one on the left is premature. That one on the right is just entering maturity. They have really nice, smooth, clear bark. I compare it to these two. These are both growing slower. The one on the left that you see there, that tree was growing slow in the past, got released in the past. So if you see the outer bark is coarser, but you notice between those coarser plates, there's smooth bark. That bark, the tree got released and it got more rapid growth later. The one on the right, by comparison, has been in suppressed growing conditions, looser bark, and has a lot of seams, spiral seams. It's a very low quality stem. And what I'm talking about right now is specific to hard maple. Hard maple really compartmentalizes damage effectively. Most of my other trees that I'm looking at, many other species are not quite as good at compartmentalizing damage. So if I look at this tree, in the old days, pole skidders were essentially how we got this wood out until we started having forwarders available. And the impact of that is that we had butt damage on many of these trees. So this is a hard maple with butt damage at the base. That in hard maple can frequently be really contained. That's that same tree. You can see the stump. It was butted off to clear the butt damage. And that's what you got. You can see the time where that is. The way trees, particularly hard maple, respond is the wood that was formed at the time of the injury is subject to that wounding effect. But the wood that grows after it, assuming the wounding is not extreme, the wood that grows after it is generally clear and clean. And so what you can see is that wounding happened when that tree was small. It grew over it, it compartmentalized it, and you end up with a relatively nice looking log. And that's the upper end of that same log. Small, relatively small false heart that was formed. The wounding that happened formed that, but the tree grew past it. So if I was to say something, those type of wounds in trees, I think, are overemphasized within hard maple for their importance. Butt defect frequently is a relatively minor defect in many trees. There are many hard maple trees. So these photos are from that defect pub I was talking about. This is butt injury in a tree. So if you look at this, these are the boards milled off of that, not the same tree in the original picture, a different tree, but one that had butt injury. You can see how that tree sealed in that injury. And you can see the timing of when this happened. It happened when the tree was relatively small. It took quite a number of years to completely seal it. And if you look at the boards formed, so the fifth and sixth board on there, on the other side of that tree from the injury, past that center column where there was staining, those are clear boards. Those are some beautiful lumber. This butt defect should not be looked at as a defect that indicates that the tree necessarily should be harvested unless there are other external indicators beyond that butt defect in hard maple. If it was red maple, my statement would be completely different. Mid-stem tear-outs. We have so many ice storms and wind storms and snow loading events, and you can just name all of the horrible things that can happen here. Mid-stem tear-outs are problematic because they tear across a wide range of the tree. They usually tear impacting the entire side of the tree where the tear-out happened. So if you look at this tree, it was torn out. It had time for the tree to recover and begin to seal in the wounding. And if you look, the wood that grew after the tear-out is clear, clean wood. You look at the internal sides of this, the board that's on the opposite side is basically relatively limited impact from that tear out because hard maple is really good at compartmentalizing. Maple borer. I see a lot of trees marked because people see this maple borer and look at it as a catastrophic injury. And don't get me wrong, it has a significant impact on those boards, but it is a highly compartmentalized wounding. When you look at the impact on this, above and below it, the compartmentalization on this, it happens right where the wounding happens, and it generally does not, unless there's another issue that results from the maple borer, like a seam. It generally does not proceed much beyond the location where the maple borer happened in the tree. If you look at that tree, that's clean, beautiful wood outside of the area where the maple borer hit it. If you get a seam by comparison, I think seams are underappreciated for how catastrophic they can be for trees because they occur across the entirety frequently occur all the way the pith of the tree. They go across many, many growing rings. And the impact of this frequently results in staining. So this tree with this seam on the left, these are the first 5 inches of boards we cut. That's what proceeded through the whole tree. If we are attempting to sell white wood within hard maple, there's really almost no white wood in that tree. That is a color degraded wood. Now it still can be sold, but it definitely has color degrade. So I take everything I just said and I throw this at a system level because I still need foresters out marking volume and putting it on the market. So if you remember when I said I first came here and single tree selection was considered the main method, all of these things I'm showing you here, overstory removal, shelterwood, irregular shelterwood, group selection, patch selection, all of those have a place in some settings within northern hardwoods. But let's start with single tree selection because that's the one that's been used the most in Wisconsin. I marked this site quite a number of years ago. I should say my business marked this site. It was me marking it though. That individual stem is, at the time I marked it, was a 12-inch diameter stem with 2 future potential veneer cuts. Not right now. Right now, it's kind of an okay tree, but add 20 years to that tree, and that is a thing of beauty. There's a 22-inch maple next to it. It was a nice maple, but it was, declining. I cut the 22-inch maple, or I should say I marked it, a logger cut it. And that released that tree. That individual stem there has 2 future veneer cuts. That stem is building 13% internal rate of return right now. That is an amazing stem. Cutting that to release that 22-inch tree is completely illogical. That is a beautiful stem and is the future of the stand. That 22-inch tree is the past in that stand. These trees have incredible ability to respond after release. So this is a stem from that hard maple project. And you'll notice it's got dark heart in the center. It's got history of wounding on the one side. And there's a tendency to refer to those trees as craplings, low quality stems. Well, that crapling in that tree basically grew out to be a grade 1 saw log. And if you look at the growth rings, you can see they were growing pretty good. Took 48 years to get to the size of the crapling. And by crapling, I mean low quality sapling, crap plus sapling. Took 48 years to get to that site. Got damaged during the logging, likely hit by a tree being pulled by a skidder. And in the next 39 years, grew from that low quality, piece of maybe one stick pulp into a grade one sawlog. The timing on this becomes kind of important. So this is a specific stand. And what I will tell you is if you look at the percentage of veneer on this, if I look at the saw logs on this site, we went through and I did, full assessment on this. For the trees over 18 inches, there were 16 square feet of basal area that actually was going to go out as veneer. And there, then in the ones that are the large saw log size class, smaller than 18, there were 5 square feet that was going to go out as veneer. And even in some of the ones that are in the quote small saw log size, there were individual cuts. When you look at this, that means that of the basal area in that site, 16 plus 5 plus 2, which is 23 square feet of basal area, had veneer cuts in it. When I did the overall numbers, this site was one of the highest amount of veneer per stand of the sawlog cuts in the trees. So not bolts, not pulp. It had 38% veneer. Amazing site, just unbelievable. I cannot overemphasize how good this site looked. But if I look at future veneer or future tree potential, so what happens if I grow it? Most of those big ones aren't going anywhere except down. If they're either going to stay at the same grade or they're going to degrade. So if I push this to the right on this and I look at what has no upgrade potential, I got 68 plus 15 plus 4 that has no upgrade potential. I have 5 plus 6 that has upgrade potential. So of the 98 square feet of basal area left on that site, only 11 square feet has the potential to upgrade. In the case of this stand, I am holding a lot of volume that is grade one or veneer in order to put it into an uneven age management condition. And I don't think the stand's capable of it. It just does not have, it's not a position where we can do single tree selection on it. Or said another way, that stem's ready. So at some point, likely when you start getting these these stems will eventually degrade. I call this 100-inch budding, where stem's bad enough they don't try to butt it off anymore. They essentially cut 100 inches off, try to throw it as product of some sort of product, and hopefully make something nice above it. So summarizing all of this for single tree selection, best increase in value is small trees change in grade or product class. Large trees don't make this change. They're on growth only. And we're slow growing. We're in the lake states. Maple's even worse due to color change. So where you're looking at dollars important, it's kind of important for a forester to be able to look at these trees by piece. What's the first ace 10 or 12 going to do? What's the next one above that? And make decisions based on the current stage of product class the tree is already in. So I just said single tree selection, but then I said all of these other things are actually possible. Let's go through and look at a table that says when we can use those. So if I have a stand that is mature and has good quality stems, and I have a mid-story that's good quality, I might be able to do single tree selection. That might actually work. I may also choose to do a thin from above in that stand condition. I have good overstory, but I also have good mid-story. I cut the big stuff to release the higher quality, smaller stuff. Those stands, good overstory, good mid-story, have a lot of opportunities that I can play with. Many cases, however, what I'm seeing, if I'm lucky, is a poor quality overstory because it's been picked through 2 or 3 times with previous harvests. But one of those harvests was hard enough that I got regeneration, so now I have good sized pulp or bolt sized trees in there. I may choose to do a thin from above in that condition, remove the big older stems that are lower quality and aging on the stump to release the higher quality smaller stems. I may have big wood that has poor quality understory, and so I don't have any future opportunities in those stands because the mid story basically isn't going to go anywhere, or I may not even have any mid story. I may have to do shelterwood or at least group selection, or in some cases, if I have good reach in baby trees, it may make sense to just do an overstory removal in those settings. Sometimes I'll go into stands that are immature, that have good quality. And if they have good quality, I can do a lot of different things with those. Single tree selection is very valid in those settings. Or I may have poor quality in mature stock, and I might try to thin from below to improve quality. And finally, I may end up with immature and low quality stock, which I see pretty regularly. I may have no options. I may have to wait till it's big enough to do something commercially. It just may not be available. Or I might want to try to convert this site to something else, possibly overstory removal with planning. So many of our hard maple slash northern hardwood stands have gotten to the point that they've aged enough that we don't have a ton of opportunity silviculturally right now to do things like single tree selection. We are more restricted in many cases to other versions of uneven age management or possibly even age management. Now, a project like, or a set of projects like this, I got a lot of people to thank. Worked with Kretz Lumber, Taggart and Lumber, Steigerwald Land Services, Connor Forest Management, Bureau Commissioners of Public Lands, so many county, state, and private foresters, a whole bunch of projects across the state. I basically, for 2 years, was on logging jobs every day for 6 or 7 weeks of the summer to do the dark heart and the irregular or the maternal rate of return project. And there were a lot of really high quality cutters, hand cutters, and processor operators. I'm not going to name all of them, but their names are there. And then the funding was from things like McIntyre Stennis, SFI Wisconsin, and other sources. And with that, I am going to stop share and open it up for questions.
It's taken me a minute here for Zoom to react to me. Thanks a lot, Mike. That was great. We have a couple of questions and but I'm going to do something I don't normally do, which is let Emma Belling ask her question directly to you. So Emma, you have your hand raised. Um, do you have a question for us? You should be able to talk. I'm sorry, we're not hearing you, Emma. So do me a favor and oh, you didn't know your hand was raised. I see. Um, so we have a limited number of questions in the chat, so I encourage folks to put a few more in there. But we did get one from um, I'm gonna not do a good job with your last name, Matt. Matt Pets Giguere. Um, can we get a copy of your last slide, the table of when you do what treatment? And do you mind if you have
No,
some
actually,
additional thoughts
no, actually,
on
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, no. I think it's really interesting in talking about how you convert or manage a system to get to that point where you can do that single tree management. So if you have some of those management takeaways as you step through that process and maybe like have a single age class and you want to get from point A to point B to turn it into that multi-age stand where you can do that sort of management, I'd love to have you share that too.
So that table's actually available. So I provided everything comes with a long story, so forgive me. I was on the marking guide, timber marking guide chapter ad hoc committee here in Wisconsin a number of years ago when we updated it. And I put together this guide for trying to train early career foresters to make the decisions on the fly functionally. They took that guide and decided it didn't fit perfectly within the marking chapter. The chapter it fit best in was northern hardwoods. So if somebody goes into the Wisconsin silviculture guide and goes to northern hardwoods, just scroll down to the appendix and that marking guide is right there. And it has immense, beyond that part, there's immense detail in the rest of the chapter too. Wisconsin has an amazing set of resources with that silviculture guide. But yeah, that is right within the appendix of that, so they can just pull that down instantly. As far as how to target this, um, I think we like the idea of single tree selection. I know I do. It's my favorite type of marking to do when I can. However, I think what we probably would end up preferring to do is some version of irregular shelterwood. And by that, I mean, and that's kind of what set this whole thing up for me originally. I think that if we mix systems and we are much more active about where we do it on the site, so we don't try to hit a basal area target across the site. What we do is try to give each area of the site what it actually needs. And I have these overall targets, and I know, Peter, you've heard me say this with birds before, but 5 to 20% overstory removal, 5 to 20% of the stand in a shelter wood or below stocking condition than the matrix. What that ends up doing through time is if I go into the stand every 15 years, which is a normal entry period in Wisconsin for hardwoods, I continually am developing small stuff and I am continually developing a condition where I can then pull the top off later. These things ideally are not just gaps. We use the word gap, and a lot of times it's a one or two tree gap. Those gaps are frequently too small. They become food plots for the deer. I think that these could be arranged on the landscape where we have existing opportunities. So I mark a lot of timber. So we're talking, I've marked between 9 and 11,000 acres myself, plus a whole bunch with students. So it's a bunch of acres. And when I look at those, where I have opportunistic pockets, so places that for whatever reason I have regeneration on the ground already. Um, Pulling the pin on the overstory there, and then to the north side of those pockets, making a reduced stocking area so I can build up baby trees there because light penetration is going to be largely from the south. I build the conditions to the north of that so that at the next stand entry, the pin can be pulled on that. And just opportunistically taking advantage of what's on the site. In many cases, it requires training of foresters or your marking crew to actually get them to mark hard enough to do that. The tendency of most people is to not see those opportunities. And it's not me saying anything negative about foresters. We are specifically trained to hit basal area targets, and we do really good at that. Um, I think we miss the opportunities to decide this pocket needs the top pulled. And this can be pockets of wind damage. It always surprises me how wind and ice damage tends to do a lot of what I frequently want it to do. We do silviculture to mimic, these events, and then it's entertaining to see it actually, the events themselves do a really good job in many cases. But yeah, opening the stands up enough that we can get regeneration, taking advantage of existing regeneration pockets, clearing out areas that have been degraded from previous stuff as your starting point.
Great. Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate that. I have another question here for you. I'm thinking of how to apply this information to forest health improvement in single-aged aspen stands here in Itasca County, Minnesota. Do you have some recommendations for less of a northern hardwoods and more of kind of an aspen monoculture?
Yeah, that's actually a little harder to do if it is actually a monoculture and you don't have other species in it, which there frequently are other species, just
Right,
retention
right, sure.
benefits. So your things like your oaks, if you have them, or your just your other species on the site. For wildlife, they act as good singing perches. They In Wisconsin, I end up with this occurrence a lot where I will have a percentage of oak, let's say 10 to 20 square feet of oak on a site and a lot of aspen. And it is just so easy to designate the bigger oak to be left. Just you don't even need to mark them. It's just, everything, every oak bigger than 5 inches leave on the site. And it actually works pretty well for the loggers. You'll have a few of them cut because some of them, you're in a machine and some of those are going to end up looking like aspen, not intentionally, it just happens. And the flip side is some of the aspen are going to end up looking like oak. And so you have a few stray aspen left because, just how it went. Um, but that adds structural diversity. It's not really truly uneven age, but as you push those aspen stands forward and they start to mature, you now have two structures in it. And that second structure tends to really strongly favor um, once it gets to 45, you have a 40, 45 years old, somewhere like that, you have a really defined single age group, but you've got the second structure that gives you some old growth attributes and something that is really not an old growth stand. It's a little harder to pull it off, frankly, with aspen, unless you just subdivide into small pockets. It's not a species group that's super well suited to uneven age management.
Thank you for that. A number of questions coming in a couple spots. Do me a favor and post them in the Q&A if you can. But do you have any experience in northern hardwood stands in northeastern Minnesota along the North Shore? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on quality management in those stands.
I'm always cautious of, I've been over in, so I used to work in Minnesota, but I've been over in Wisconsin now for 22 years. And I'm always cautious talking outside of my region because both market and biology it's similar species, but different conditions. And a lot of the stuff in Minnesota, you have a lot lower quality stems in a lot of the state. So I just would rather not comment on that part of the state, except to say biologically, we almost certainly can carry this stuff out. It's more whether the quality of the stems can handle it, and I just am not comfortable enough with what's going on over there. Really,
Sure.
feedback. Sorry about that.
And then another question, do the old Arbogast single tree selection uneven age guidelines for basal area by diameter class have relevance anymore? 92BA was optimum across all diameter classes, but cutting was needed in all size classes.
The entertaining thing about Arbogast, so it all of these guides were steps in understanding how to do stuff. And Arbogast has a presupposition that we actually have multiple age classes within it. And the problem is we don't in most of these stands. In a stand where you do have several age classes, Arbogast actually is a wonderful idea. Um, when in conditions where we don't, we have to set the conditions to make that happen. And that's where the Arbogast guide falls down. It works well in settings that are uneven age, but the vast majority of what we have isn't. And so, no, I love that they developed that guidance back when they did. I love what's coming out of the Forest Service in northeastern Wisconsin, looking at the experimental forest over there. That's a long-term project that worked in a more even age condition. So you're actually starting to see stuff, and it's been really cool to kind of watch it through time because 90 square feet was the best. When I was a young forester, 90 was the number, and then I kind of became a little bit older young forester, and 75 was the best number. And now I'm becoming an older old forester, and 60 is the best number. And I've been watching that 60 stand because I'm in that forest periodically every couple, 2, 3 years. And those 60s have started to look really good. Those smaller stems that grew in are now starting to recruit into actually being measured as trees now and not just regen. And that's kind of what's driving that, at least in part. So yeah, it's been interesting to watch this because tree forests last for a really long time and we don't, right? And so by the end of your career, you've learned stuff that you wish you knew 20, 30 years ago. And I think the Arbogast guide wasn't a really neat idea. It works good in existing uneven age forest. It's a little bit more difficult to apply it in conditions where we only have a single age group.
I appreciate that. Um, we're getting close to the top of the hour here, but I can't let you escape without a wildlife question. So, as you're managing for grading and veneer, are there wildlife trade-offs that you've observed in doing so?
I can say yes, but then I'm going to say no. And here's how the no part of it goes in. That word that I chose to use, we were talking about order of removal. And my preference in life is not to look at the world that way. I want order of retention. And I know you've heard me say this before. My first trees I keep, there are usually only 3 trees per acre that matter on these sites for wildlife, and all the rest of them are just there. And if I look at bark foraging critters, like some of my little buddies that I really like, my black and white warblers as an example, coarse bark, lots of micro habitat features in the bark. If I actually go through and decide I have 3 trees per acre that I'm going to hold until they die natural causes, blah, blah, blah. Most times those three trees, those are the ones that matter. What I do to almost everything else doesn't. A pipe stem, or I should say a beautiful cannon barrel veneer tree is really good for veneer. It is absolutely having none of those characteristics I just talked about. You can manage both of those on the sites. Usually they're not the same trees. Just attentiveness not to destroy the ones that matter. And actually, the economic impact is usually very low of keeping those. They're not worth anything. I think there's a tendency of foresters to look at these big ugly trees, they get marked automatically because you don't even have to think about those. And I think those are the place that most of that work, taking the wildlife factor with the veneer in there. I mean, I like them both. I mean, mostly, Peter, you end up hearing me and things talking about birds because I'm kind of obsessed with them, but I also like veneer.
So we've reached 10 o'clock, but Randy had just a quick question for you. When will your oak guide be available?
God, that's a good question. So I just did the final edit about 2, 3 weeks ago. So the answer to that is rather soon. Um, let's, I wish I could say a month, but in the next couple, 2, 3 months, it'll definitely be ready. We, as you would imagine, going through in graphic design, we want it to look really nice and it's really close.
Great. Thanks. All right. We're at 10:01, so I want to thank Mike again for his excellent presentation. Thanks a lot for being here, Mike. But also thank all of you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again at our next webinar on May 12th at 9 a.m. when Dr. Marcella Windmuller-Capioni and Dr. Nick Jelinski with the University of Minnesota will be presenting on carbon and forest peatlands, small trees, deep peat, and big data. So until then, thank you all so much for joining us today, and we'll see you soon. Thanks again, Mike.